Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Today we're diving into one of the most complex and consequential stories of our time. The ongoing tug-of-war between the United States and China. You've probably seen headlines about trade talks resuming in Europe, rumors about Trump visiting China, or business executives flying to Beijing for what some claim is a breakthrough. But let's take a step back and really examine what's going on here. Are we heading toward a meaningful trade deal? Or is this just political theater? In this video, we're going to unpack the current state of U.S. China trade negotiations, what both sides really want, why past deals have failed, and how geopolitical flashpoints like Taiwan, Ukraine, and rare earths play into the bigger picture. So buckle up. This is going to be a deep dive. Let's get into it. First things first. What's happening between the U.S. and China isn't what most people would call a trade negotiation in the traditional sense. A real trade deal, like what the U.S. has with Canada or the EU, involves clearly defined tariff reductions, legal frameworks, and long-term economic cooperation. But that's not what we're seeing here. What's happening is more like a series of crisis management talks, ceasefire meetings aimed at preventing things from spiraling further out of control. These talks are happening everywhere: Geneva, London, Stockholm. But what are they really producing? Nothing concrete. That alone tells you where we stand. We're not building a partnership, we're managing a cold conflict. And if both countries are sitting down this often, it means one thing: neither side wants a total breakdown just yet. That's a signal, but it's not necessarily a good one. Some media outlets are speculating that Trump has softened his stance on China. They say he's preparing for a state visit, perhaps even ready to strike a deal. Let's pump the brakes. Trump's rhetoric can be misleading. He often speaks off the cuff, sometimes carelessly, and translation between English and Chinese can make things even messier. Media outlets, both in China and the West, often cherry-pick his statements to fit a narrative. But here's the real story. Trump wants China to open its markets, period. That's been consistent across his policies, with other countries too. He's pushed Mexico, Canada, and the EU to level the playing field when it comes to tariffs and market access. Why would China be any different? So when Trump says we're close to a deal, it likely means we're not fighting as much this week. That's it. Not a full-blown economic partnership. Let's talk about what market access really means. Sure, China has opened up certain sectors since the 1980s, but crucial areas like finance, tech, data, and high-end manufacturing remain tightly controlled. This isn't new. Western governments have been pressing China for decades to make its markets truly open and fair. But under the current political model in China, that's not happening anytime soon. Just look at what happens when Chinese tech companies try to list in U.S. markets. They get pulled back by Beijing. Or when American firms seek to enter the Chinese financial sector, they run into red tape or find themselves outmaneuvered by state-owned giants. So how can the U.S. and China reach a comprehensive trade deal when the very concept of reciprocity doesn't even exist? Short answer: they can't. Despite all this, Chinese state media has been flooding the airwaves with positive signals. Why? It's about psychology and domestic stability. China's economy is under severe pressure. Consumer confidence is down. Unemployment among youth is skyrocketing, and foreign direct investment is drying up. One of the few ways the Chinese government can boost consumer sentiment is by manufacturing the illusion that U.S.-China ties are improving. Why? Because if people believe things are getting better with the West, they're more likely to spend money, invest, and take risks. That's why you see so much coverage of American CEOs visiting Beijing or Trump allegedly bringing a business delegation to China. The narrative is more important than the reality. Now, let's address the recent news that a group of top American CEOs is visiting China. Sounds big, right? But dig a little deeper, and you'll realize this trip is being organized by the U.S. China Business Council, a private lobbying group representing American companies with a deep stake in China. Most of these companies, like FedEx or Boeing, are already operating there. Their goal isn't to shape foreign policy. It's to protect their existing market share and avoid disruptions caused by worsening diplomatic ties. This is business, not diplomacy. They're not negotiating trade terms. They're just saying, please don't make our lives harder. Now here's a real pressure point: rare earths. Rare earth minerals are critical for military tech, green energy, and electronics, and China controls a huge chunk of the global supply. During Trump's last term, the U.S. restricted exports to China on certain tech items. China responded with the threat of limiting rare earth supplies. Eventually, both sides made limited concessions to avoid mutually assured economic pain. But this isn't a long-term solution. The U.S. knows it must diversify its supply chain, investing in Australia, Japan, and even domestic extraction, despite the environmental costs. Long story short, the rare earths issue is a slow-moving divorce, not a reconciliation. Here's where things get more complicated. Trade issues can't be separated from geopolitics anymore. At the recent Sweden talks, U.S. officials reportedly pressed China on its oil trade with Russia and Iran, two countries facing Western sanctions. That's not a trade discussion. That's a confrontation about the future of the global order. If China keeps propping up Russia economically, U.S. China tensions will only get worse. And if China continues importing Iranian oil at scale, it undermines the West's entire sanction strategy. No trade deal survives this level of strategic disagreement. Trump used to be seen as soft on Russia, but that narrative is changing fast. He's now signaling frustration with Putin, saying he might set a new deadline for peace in Ukraine, shorter than the previous 50-day window he floated. What does that tell us? It suggests Trump is getting closer to the EU's stance. Russia has to be contained, not indulged. And if that's the case, expect U.S.-Russia tensions to spike and China's support for Moscow to become an even bigger problem. Again, this doesn't lead to a trade breakthrough. It leads to more friction. Here's the part that doesn't get enough attention. Military leaders in Europe are openly talking about a possible global conflict by 2027. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk said he believes China and Russia may be preparing for a global-scale war within 2 years. And UK Defense Minister John Healey just said the British military is ready to fight in the Pacific if Taiwan is attacked. You can dismiss these statements as alarmist, but you probably shouldn't. These leaders are hearing things behind closed doors that we don't. If they're saying it publicly, it means they believe the risks are very real. And let's be honest, in a world where global leaders are preparing for potential war, who seriously thinks a comprehensive trade agreement is on the table? Back in Washington, Congress is sending its own message. Right in the middle of these talks, both Republican and Democratic senators introduced 3 new bills targeting China's behavior on Taiwan, Uyghur human rights, and transnational repression. This bipartisan push shows that even if Trump wanted to cut a deal, Congress is preparing legal firewalls to make that harder. It's a message to Beijing and a warning to Trump. Don't think about folding. So, where does that leave us? Here's the reality. U.S.-China trade talks are really about avoiding escalation, not building cooperation. Deep structural disagreements, from market access to human rights to alliances with Russia, are not going away. Trump isn't softening. If anything, he's becoming more hawkish on both China and Russia. Western governments are preparing not just for economic confrontation, but potentially military ones as well. And any optimistic headlines you read, more often than not, they're just spin. So the next time you see a headline that says, China and the U.S. are close to a deal, just ask yourself, what kind of deal? And what's the cost? Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Is a real deal still possible? Or are we headed toward a permanent standoff? Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical,